Hi, I'm Tara, and welcome to Les2 Books. Email me at tara@thelesbianreview.com with any questions or comments, or come join our Facebook group, the Lesbian Review Book Club. I'm really excited because I'm joined today by Fiona Riley, who I'm a huge fan of. She's the author of the awesome Perfect Match romance series, and her latest book is Media Darling, which is out everywhere from Bold Strokes Books, and it's fabulous, and you should go out and get it and read it and love it. So welcome, Fiona. No, they can't see you waving. Hello, say hi.
No, I didn't know you wanted me to pause. Hi, how are you?
I'm great, thanks. You're here today to talk about your journey as a reader of lesbian fiction. So where did that begin?
So, kind of funny, I didn't find lesfic until I was in college, towards the end of college, actually. I went to med school, and I had a lot of reading to do and a lot of work, and I just didn't do anything leisurely for the first few years, and Borders was closing. And they had this massive sale. So they were at Borders and Barnes & Noble were in pretty good competition where I live, and Borders was closing. So my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, went to Borders, and she was like, I'm going to get all the books because everything's like 60% off, 70% off. And we had just moved into a new house. We had these bookcases, which are gorgeous, but they were empty. And there's nothing worse than like an empty bookcase. It just looks so sad and depressing. So she was like, I'm going to go out and get books. So she went out and she was picking through like the bargain bin at Borders, and she came home with 3 lesfic books that I didn't even know that was a genre that was available at Borders. And she came home with them and she was like, check out these books I found. And that's kind of how I found them. She put them on the counter, and then we took turns reading them one at a time. And I was like, whoa, this is my first full exposure to it.
That's amazing. So which books were they?
So I have them because I kept them forever because it was the first time I'd ever seen something like this in print. And the first book was 13 Hours by Meghan O'Brien, which if that's going to be your intro to lesfic, then you should buckle up. But it was my first book. It was my first book. I was blown away because I didn't even know this existed, and that's an erotic romance. And I was like, okay, well, that was sort of life-changing. Mm-hmm. And then the other book was actually my first Radclyffe book. It was Desire by Starlight. And again, my wife was really drawn to the cover because that's who she is. Like, she's like, oh yeah, that's great. And then she brought the book home, and it's a little bit of sci-fi. This one's not sci-fi, I'm sorry. This is a really interesting story about a romance writer, actually, who falls in love with somebody in a small town. And then the last one was so hilarious. It was Family Affair by Saxon Bennett, which is so funny. So funny. Where it's a lesbian couple, and one of them gets pregnant accidentally at the gynecologist. It's so funny. It was my first exposure to comedy and lesfic. And the whole thing is about just like the family development and what happens and how they had this relationship, and then everything changed sort of spontaneously, and like how they were dealing with that. And it's worth a read.
Is it like a Jane the Virgin kind of? That's how she...
Yeah, exactly. This was well before Jane the Virgin, so maybe Saxon should contact them and ask them for some royalties because it's 100% with this one.
I think she should.
Yeah, it was so funny. And the funny thing about that is that there's not a ton of, graphic sex in that book. It's much more like conversational humor. So that to start with Meghan O'Brien's, 13 Hours, and then have that really be my second, or like a kind of Radclyffe somewhere in the middle, it was interesting. But it was a great exposure. I think I covered all my bases the first time out.
So what did it mean for you finding these books?
It was a really big eye-opening experience for me because I had spent so much of my time studying medicine and I was very studious, and I played a lot of music when I was younger, and I was really immersed in like creative art in that way, like kind of music, and I did some poetry and some casual writing, but it wasn't something that I, really knew a ton about. It was much more of a feeler creative. Like I'm definitely into like music. And even in the business I do now and the work I do, it's a lot of physical stuff, like a lot of physical movement and things like that. So I spent a lot of time studying and a lot of time like immersing myself in that culture. And I don't think I realized outside of the things I had to learn, like I had to read growing up, like I grew up with all the classics. I went to private Catholic school. So there was a lot of exposure to certain type of literature, and I can definitely recite things back, but I don't think I had a lot of freedom in like play. And I think that for me, the only things I saw outside of like learning literature was what my mother read, which was my mother was like the queen of Harlequin romance. And she had this, we jokingly called it like the underground mob of Harlequin romance, because what we would do is my friends and I would all get together, and her friends, who were the mothers of my friends, had like this currency of paperbacks that they would put in like brown paper bags, and we would go visit each other, and we'd just do like the handoff. Like I'd go visit my friend and he'd be like my mom's updated stash, and then we'd swap them and put them in the trunk. And that's happened all through high school for me. Like thousands and thousands of those books passed through my hands, like in little brown paper bags. And so that was my only experience to romance, my only exposure. And then to find out that there actually was something that was written, with lesbians involved or bisexuals, and just to see that my culture was embraced in that. And it just became really hilarious that I found it, and it was like a great escape for me. But it all started with brown paper bags and passing Harlequin romance.
That's an amazing story. I love that.
It still happens. We are in our 30s. We are married. We have kids. And I will go and visit my, friends' mothers around the holiday, and they'll be like, hey, I got a bag of books. Although it's less now. Most of them have e-readers, but they still pass them. Because they used to read 14 books a week. So it was really easy to like interchange them between us. And it was so embarrassing as a teenager to have that bag of naughty books in the trunk.
Oh my God, that's so funny. So what did you go on to read from there? Like, did you find yourself drawn to any particular authors or like genres or subgenres in lesfic?
So the interesting thing about the batch of books that I got, 2 of them were Bold Strokes, but Saxon's Bennett's book is actually Bella. So I all of a sudden was exposed to not only lesfic, which I'd never heard of, and then romantic lesfic. Also, I had multiple publishers. So I all of a sudden had a place to look. So it wasn't a matter of just like, scrounging through bookshelves. I could actually go to publishers. And then that's when I sort of found the other things that I picked up, more Meghan O'Brien, some stuff from Jessica Thomas, Jerry Hill. And I found by the publishers, I was able to find other authors, because at that point, this is a while ago. There wasn't quite the resource that there is online to be able to find links to things. And I think it was still a little bit more, librarian and paper based, which was a tricky thing to navigate, I think, even though I'm from the United States, I'm from a really liberal state. I still think there's still something about being young and kind of looking into those things and not knowing what to look for and asking questions that was sort of overwhelming. So I think by having a publisher and being able to track backwards, that's how I actually kind of found more of the written word that I was able to read. And I picked up tons of it. At that point that I did, I picked up a lot of it, and then e-readers became more of a thing, and that's sort of where it started. But it was a Borders book clearance.
So when you started writing, what were you reading at that time?
So interestingly enough, after I'd found lesfic, I was really into like television and watching a lot of shows, and Grey's Anatomy was on, and I was sort of getting exposure to some, like gay relationships on TV. And that's actually how I kind of fell into, I was on a trip home from New York on a bus. And the trips from New York on a bus are always crammed, and they're like $5 a seat, and it's total chaos. And my e-reader had died, and all I had was my smartphone, which was a BlackBerry at the time. And I was just desperately trying to get something to read because it was a 5-hour ride. And it was, I had been watching a television show earlier, and I missed an episode because we were on vacation. So I was looking to find catch up, kind of like what you missed. And that's when I first found fanfiction, because I had typed it into Google, and then I was like, oh, what is this? And then I had all of a sudden hours of stuff to read on my tiny BlackBerry screen. So when I started writing, I had actually moved away from books, and I was reading more fan fiction, just because it was so easy to get to, and it was so easy to see and scan. And I loved my favorite part is the category system of being able to filter what I'm looking for. And I think that was the best thing about fan fiction, is I could really be like, well, today I really want to read about a teacher or a student or whatever. And it was so easy to find that, because it's just pop it into a filter and then you can search it. So for me, as somebody who is a little more tech involved at that time, I went right to that. And I was reading fan fiction when I started to write my first book.
You're listening to The Lesbian Talk Show. TheLesbianTalkShow.com, your hub of podcast information.
Were there any particular fandoms that were your favorite?
So this question, I get this question a lot. So the Perfect Match series is 3 books. It's the first one starts a strike and match, and it's about Samantha Montero and Lucinda Moss. That came directly from Glee, which I catch a little bit of heat for because I'm totally like a Britannia fanatic about it. And that's what I was reading on the ride home from the New York bus trip. I was reading up on some Glee fanfic, and I thought this would be a great idea to write a story.
Yeah.
I sort of shelved it and didn't do anything with it for months and months and months, and it just sat there like in the back of my mind for a long time. But that's where it started.
That's kind of awesome. Are you still reading fanfic?
I don't read fanfic. I don't read fanfic anymore, and only because I find that I have a tendency to pick up bad habits. And I think that a lot of fanfiction needs to be edited. I think the stories are fantastic, but I think that there are some nuances that get lost, and I find myself picking up bad habits. So I tried not to get too involved in stuff that's not been edited, if that makes sense, because I find like my bad habits come back that we're trying to beat down. Like I have a lot of bad habits, and I'm trying to get rid of a lot of them and change some of my script and writing, and that's something I try to avoid. So I don't typically, if somebody really says they want me to read something or they recommend something, I'll think about it or I'll peruse it, but I don't as much as I used to anyway. I do still have a fan fiction account written out there though in the world somewhere.
Oh.
But I haven't written in a long time.
Yeah. So, how do you feel? I'm trying to decide if I want this to be a think or feel, so it can be both. What do you think? How do you feel about where we're at as a genre now?
I think that the last 2 years in the U.S. have been hard. I'm sure with everyone they've been difficult. I am very much a child of the Obama years. Like that's when I came into myself. That's really when I got involved in politics and really got myself like immersed in the culture. I was more just maturing around that time. I think that's just when I hit my maturity point. And it's been really difficult to be in a country to see all these things that have been really wonderful and progressive for the LGBT community to start to roll back, and to see a lot more people, living in fear more, and then seeing a lot more of the really negative stuff that's out there. And it's frightening to have something and then feel like it's being taken away. And for me, I've been very fortunate and naive to it, because it's something that as I grew, my opportunities grew. And it wasn't that all of a sudden one day the floodgates opened. It came with my growth as a person, just by my age, I think. So to see that sort of starting to get scaled back and then having my own family, it's scary. So I find that the lesfic world right now, I think, is so much more important and valuable than it has been before, because I think it gives us a community and it gives us an escape and it gives us a happy ending and it gives us the opportunity to be and see what we want out in the world. And I think that creativity and storytelling are so important in that regard, especially in difficult times. And I would consider this to be a challenging time for a gay individual or someone coming out or somebody in a new relationship or even navigating an old relationship. It doesn't matter. I think that there are a lot of things now that I think escapism is important, and I think it's important to see that, and I think it's really important to, as somebody who has a child, I want that family emulated in text, and I want that out there in the world so that there's something for them to go back to and look for and see that this existed and this is something that's possible. And I think right now it's important. And I think the nice thing that's happened since I've been writing is I really like to be inclusive about who's in my writing. So I have lesbian characters, I have trans characters, I have bi characters, I have gay men in mine, I have straight people. I mean, I think it's really important to be inclusive to all those things, because I think that's the world we live in. And I think it's important to see that stuff there. And I personally have felt like the newer stuff that's coming out is much more inclusive. And I can see going backwards now that I read some of the older stuff that I hadn't seen when I first was introduced. I see the positive change of that inclusivity, and I like that. And I think the storytelling has really come along. I think some of these stories are fantastic, and I want them all to be movies and television series, because I think they're just so wonderful. And I think the storytelling just gets better and better every time somebody puts the book out. I think there's just such great writing out there. And I think that that's something I've seen that's been a positive change too. And I think some of that is from, skill and craft honing. And I think some of it's just a matter of necessity. I think it's just some of the people that are writing now are people who are fun. And I think they have a lot of fun stories to tell.
So if you have, you're a busy person, you're a writer, you have a job, you have a family, but when you find you have time to read a book, what do you like to pick up?
So when I was growing up, I used to read a lot of mystery. I have a lot of Agatha Christie on my bookshelves. I had some James Patterson. I loved a good mystery and thriller. I think now, because I have less time to leisure play, I'd like to read something that's got a happy ending, for sure. I do read romance. I don't pigeonhole myself into the kind of romance that I read, for sure. Like, I definitely like things that are playful. I like things that are light. I like things that are more involved. But I do like my characters that I read socially, like when I'm on my leisure, to be, lesfic based if possible. I used to read a lot of biographies. I don't do that anymore. But I think for me, it's an escape, because the change in social media and the way that we get news now is just so different, where I can just open my phone and look at Twitter and see what's happening. I think I definitely read less newspaper and magazine articles than I used to. I just pull them up on a blog, or I'll take a look at it that way. So when I'm leisure reading, I'm definitely reading things that are lighter and that make me laugh and that make me think and that let me escape a little bit. So typically lesfic, but not always romance-based.
And is there anything you've read in the last few months that you're especially excited about, or that you were really delighted to read?
I don't read while I write, which is something that I catch a little heat for, but...
No, I think that's pretty common.
I don't read while I write, and I have been on a sprint for the last few years of writing. I picked up a couple of Melissa Braden's books in the last few years. Chris Bryant, I think, is a reliable person to read. I love her stuff. I think she's super fun. The last book I just finished was one of the 7 Shores series from Melissa Braden. Not the last one, the third one.
I love those books.
Those are great books. I'm working on a Georgia Beers right now. And, I have some V.K. Powell in there. I love Carson Tate. Like, I do what I can to try to, really keep myself immersed. I have some Jerry Hill that I've been poking around at. So, yeah, that's the most recent ones I've been, Chris and Melissa, and Georgia's in my queue. But I do not read while I write, because just exactly what I said before. I have a habit of picking up things around me, and I don't like that. So.
That's fair. When I talked to Katie Williamson, she said that she only reads fanfic when she's writing, because she's afraid of too much bleed through if she reads traditionally published authors.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real concern for me, and that's one of the reasons why, even then, if I am going to read, I'll read somebody out of my genre, if I can, just to kind of separate myself. And I don't think I think we're more worried about it happening than it actually happens, to be honest. I don't think it really does trickle back, but you never want to lose your narrative voice, and I think that for me, mine is, I'm always a little concerned that I'll pick up something, and, I just don't want to be Madonna pretending to be British, in an interview or something. So I just try to be careful. But I really don't think it happens as much as we think it happens, but it's something that we're all worried about.
Yeah, that's fair. So is there anything else that you want to share with listeners about your journey as a reader?
I think as a reader, I really appreciate a well-crafted story. I think that I love, erotic romance. I love the distraction of it. The last book I actually read, I was incorrect before. The last book I just read was The Sex Therapist Next Door. I just finished that.
Woo! That's a good one. And
so that's one of those great palate cleansers, right? Like, Meghan O'Brien's great for, rejuvenating whatever you need to rejuvenate, whatever that is for you. And it just gives you a nice palate refresh and a cleanse. And for me, if I ever get writer's block, the first thing I do is I write a sex scene. I'll just remove myself from the situation. I'll write a sex scene, whether it's for the characters in that book or just no characters I'm making up on the spot. For me, that's a cleanse. So as somebody, as a reader, I like to be surprised. I like to be charged. I like to feel something that, that brews a little bit. I like things that take a little bit of time to get to where they can get to. And I love that, build up for that. And I love a really good story. And I think that that's probably the thing that draws me in. So I've read quite a few books now. I read a lot of books from my fellow authors. I write as much as I can. And I think that the thing that draws me in is a really good story. So I like to have a lot of good backstory. I like friends that are involved. I like good secondary and third characters that feel real. I think I want to be able to sit myself in the scene. So I like the details around me too. I like to be able to really immerse myself in it. So I'm a story person. That being said, The Sex Therapist Next Door is what I just read, which is a great story, but that's, it's got a different drive, I think. And I think that's good too. I think there's so many good options. I don't want to ever limit myself, but as a reader, I'm a story person. I love to be really taken along for a story. I love to be surprised. I like to find new things about characters that I didn't expect in the beginning that I find at the end as they kind of develop with me. Like, I like to feel that we've kind of grown as a group.
And because this is going up in January, so is there anything you're excited about for 2019 and beyond?
Media Darling, which is the one I just released, is a big book. It's probably the biggest book I've written by 25 or 30,000 words. And it's a little bit of a departure for me in that it's a really story-heavy book. So everything I just sort of talked about, I really tried to emulate in this book and put in there. I'm really excited about some of the feedback I've gotten about that. I'm looking forward to seeing kind of how this next book I'm working on develops from that, because I think that was a little bit of a change for me. And I'm really looking forward to some of the things that I have kind of on personally that I have coming up. Some life things and also some writing things. And I think that I've gotten a little preview of some books that are coming out next year that I think look fantastic. Like, I definitely have a must-read, want-to-read list that's growing by the minute, which is so sad because you want to read them all and then all of a sudden the list never ends, which I think is a great thing. But, it's a vicious cycle. But yeah, so some personal things, some writing things, and some upcoming book stuff I'm really excited about. I'm really excited about the idea of the writing community getting more involved in Lexicon, which I think is so cool. I really love that that's going to really branch and bring in some communities. I don't think I'll be able to make it, unfortunately, for the timing. But I think that's awesome that we are now bringing this relatively smaller kind of niche group into a much larger scale and connecting more communities. And I think that is the best thing. And I'm really excited to see what comes out of that, because I think there's so many great authors that are going to come from that and so many great opportunities for readers and fans to get together. And I think that type of personal community, one-on-one, helps you develop a better internet community too.
So where can people find you online if they want to connect with you?
So I am always on Twitter at Fiona Riley Fic. I am always on Facebook ad nauseum at Fiona Riley Fiction. I do have a website, FionaRileyFiction.com, and you can catch me pretty much anywhere. I'm pretty accessible. I do a lot of appearances in the Boston, New England area. I do 4 or 5 or 6 in the course of a calendar year, and I'll try to be at a few of the conferences that happen. I'll definitely be at GCLS, and I will be at Women's Week in Provincetown as well in the fall, and maybe I'd love to go to Lexicon, but I think I may have to Skype in on that one, so we'll see.
There's always the following year.
Well, I'm really excited to see how it goes. I think this is exciting. Like, this is such a big push and a big change. Like, I'm thrilled about this.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is all for this episode. Thank you so much, Fiona, for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Tara, and you've been listening to Let's Do Books. Remember to email me at tara@thelesbianreview.com with your questions or comments. If you're an author who's interested in joining me on the show to talk about your journey as a reader or trends that have you interested, please reach out and send me an email. If you've enjoyed this episode, please check out the show notes where you'll find a Patreon link for The Lesbian Talk Show, or visit patreon.com/The Lesbian Talk Show. Our patrons get exclusive content like bonus podcasts and interviews with authors that no one else gets access to. You can also join our Facebook group, The Lesbian Review Book Club, to talk about anything that you're reading and loving. And to find this and many other great shows, all you need to do is search for The Lesbian Talk Show on iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, or Spotify.